Hi and welcome to part 4 of my Nintendo 64 collection video. We've talked about loads of games that I own so far, and we're now looking at the next set of 10 in my collection, so let's get cracking. WWF Warzone. At the time when this came out, it was an absolutely fantastic game. I remember seeing this one advertised and they were doing sort of a previews for it in Gamer magazine, so my brother and I were waiting for absolutely ages for this one to come out, because we weren't huge wrestling fans at the time, but by the time this came out we kind of were back into wrestling. Absolutely great game at the time. The graphics were unbelievable for this game. Loads of game modes, the wrestlers that you'd expect. One little bit of a letdown was that by the time this came out, a lot of the wrestlers that were in the game were either sort of retiring or they were taking a back seat to some of the other wrestlers in the game. So by the time it came out, the roster was a little bit out of date, but the gameplay was really fun, and everyone at school used to talk about this game. At the time it was the best wrestling game ever made. This one's Extreme G. This one's like a futuristic motorcycle racing game. It's a lot of fun. The frame rate was pretty good on it. The sense of speed in it was really good at the time. Again, now it's kind of a little bit loose. The controls weren't as tight as they should be. Even though it had a multiplayer, the multiplayer was absolute garbage. Single player game, it's okay. It's a little bit like Acclaim's version of Wipeout. So it's a high speed futuristic racer with weapons. Wipeout's better in my opinion. WCW vs NWO Revenge. I talked about WCW vs NWO World Tour already. This one's pretty much of the same. It's another wrestling game. This one was made by THQ, which did make the best wrestling games on the Nintendo 64. This one's a pretty good game. Again, me and my brother used to get all the wrestling games on Nintendo 64, so naturally we had this one. Really enjoyed it. Nice big roster on there, and the same sort of tight controls that you'd expect from a lot of the THQ wrestling games. Wet Tricks. Really unusual sort of, I guess you could kind of call it a puzzle game on this one. It's based around sort of using water. It's a really unusual game. I'm not a huge puzzle fan, to be honest, but still a good game. There's not too many puzzle games, but nothing that I'd say go out in a hurry to buy, but it is pretty cheap to pick up second hand, so if you haven't already played it, it might be worth spending a few quid. I think you can get it for about 7 or 8 quid box complete, so it was never one that set the world alight, but still a little bit fun to play. Duke Nukem 64. Played it on PC first. Me, my brother and our friend, we used to play the PC version before this one, obviously. It was a really fun game. To be honest, the Nintendo 64 port was not the best port for it. The controls just never felt right on it, and when you compare it to games like GoldenEye, this one just didn't stand a chance. But again, this one's really cheap to pick up, like the previous game was, so if you haven't already played it, it's a cheap addition to your collection, and pretty easy to find as well in box complete condition. The Immortal. This is GoldenEye. Everybody's played this game. Sold something like 8 million copies, and you can tell why. It's a bit of a sleeper hit. The company that made it, Rare, they weren't expecting it to be the big blockbuster it was, but I think this one, word of mouth, spread a lot. And if any game was to really push the fact that the Nintendo 64 had 4 controller ports, you could you didn't have to buy additional accessories like you had to on previous consoles. This was one that sold people multiplayer gaming on the Nintendo 64. Also, a lot of people seem to forget that this is one that really redefined first-person shooters. Without this, there'd be nothing like Call of Duty or any other games that are setting the world alight at the moment. Really great game. The multiplayer is what everybody remembers it for, but the campaign mode was really big. Loads of challenges to do. Absolutely huge amount of weapons. Some of them were absolutely great, but everybody remembers the multiplayer mode. And if you are still playing this game, well done on you. It's a brilliant game. And if anyone plays this Odd Job, it should be burnt for being a troll. Odd Job's banned in multiplayer. Wipeout 64, talked about it a moment ago when I was talking about Extreme G. Everyone's played Wipeout. It's one of those PlayStation games everybody seems to have played on. The Nintendo 64 version even. Good port. Really similar to the PlayStation one. It's kind of more of the same. Futuristic racer with weapons. levels to unlock, multiplayer. There's better multiplayer games and there's better racing games, so not one I'd say to go out in a hurry and get hold of. But again, fairly cheap, not as cheap as some of the other games, but in a box complete condition, you're looking at paying sort of £10 to £15 for it, so it's not a whole lot of money. Knockout Kings 2000, a really great boxing game. If you like boxing games, this is probably the one that I'd recommend to get if you're after like a realistic one. Lots of boxers, including Muhammad Ali, to play as, so it's not just the ones that were around at the time. There's also legends in there as well. Tight controls, the graphics are really good, and again, not really a whole lot to say on that one. It's an EA Sports franchise, so you kind of know what to expect with them. Good solid games, but not the most exciting. Mortal Kombat 4, this was supposed to be the Mortal Kombat series' big comeback. It was a really good game, especially for Nintendo 64. There weren't too many fighting games, so this one kind of stood out. Nice 3D environments on there. A lot that you could do. The backgrounds were interactive. It also had weapons as well, which was kind of new for the Mortal Kombat series. You can see, it was an expensive game at the time. Now you can pick it up for, again, under £20, box and complete. It's still relatively rare though, which is kind of surprising. I think it's because, again, it didn't sell as well as they hoped with it being a reboot for the series. And the final game for this video is Ready to Rumble Boxing. I talked about Knockout Kings before. Again, Ready to Rumble, everyone remembers from the Dreamcast. It's one of the games that came out with the system, which really showcased all the graphics power, the high speed, the arcade style. This is a port, obviously, for the Nintendo 64. It's a lot slower than the Dreamcast version. The graphics are not as good, but again, all the characters are there, the arenas are there. It's just not as fun or as fast as the Dreamcast version. And with an arcade style game, speed's one of the main things that you want. So this one, whilst it's a good game, I still prefer Knockout Kings if you are looking for a boxing game. But for multiplayer, you can just mash the buttons. Anyone can play this game. So it's a pretty good game if you're after playing a multiplayer game with some friends that are maybe not very good at games or are new to the Nintendo 64. So that's all the games that I'll be talking about in this collection video. I'll be back soon with another video showing you the next part of my collection. In the meantime, if you like any of the games that I've talked about, please discuss them below. I always like hearing everybody's memories about games, and especially about the Nintendo 64. And I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like below.